Hi, good morning, boys and girls. Today we're going to be working on lesson 111. So like I said, we're working on lesson 111. Let's go ahead and look at part 1. Now touch the first word in part 1. What's the underlined part? Show. What word? Specialize. Next word. What is the underlined part? What word? Article. Next word. What is the underlined part? Less. What word? Countless. Next word. What is the underlined part? What word? Convinced. Next word. What is the underlined part? What word? Pressure. Let's go ahead and look at part 2. First word, what word? Reporter. Next word, what word? Races. Next word, what word? Campaign. Next word, what word? Honest. Next word, what word? Monster. Next word, what word? Discussing. Next word, what word? Unpopular. Next word, what word? Serious. Next word, what word? Suddenly. Next word, what word? Strategy. Next word, what word? Overheard. Next word, what word? Estimate. Next word, what word? Brochure. Next word, what word? Filing. Next word, what word? Creative. Next word, what word? Broadcasting. Next word, what word? Accurate. Next word, what word? Concluded. Next word, what word? Patents. Let's go ahead and move on to part 3. We're going to talk about what those words mean. Word number 1. What word? Genius. A genius is a person who is very talented or a very smart person. Word number 2. What word? Domestic. One meaning of domestic is not foreign. Everybody, what's another way of saying this car is not foreign? Get ready. This car is domestic. Number 3. What word? Intent. Your intent is your aim or your purpose. Number 4. What word? Fraud. Fraud is a trick to cheat somebody. Everybody, what do we call a trick to cheat somebody? Get ready. Fraud. Now, touch word number 5. What word? Deceit. Deceit means lying. Everybody, what does deceit mean? Get ready. Lying. Let's go ahead and move on to part 4. Make sure we're following along and paying close attention to the questions that I'm going to ask you. The title of our story is Sinner or Genius. Now let's go ahead and begin. Make sure we're tracking. Joe felt that the car campaign had turned into a monster, and he was right. The head of the advertising agency's marketing department was pretty close to her estimate about the number of cars that would be sold in this country during the year. Nearly 250,000 were sold within 6 months, about the time the 250th car had been sold. A reporter from Moment magazine found out that Joe Kappas was really the brains of the car campaign. The reporter interviewed Joe, and 2 weeks later, Joe's pictures was on the cover of Moment. Beneath it, it said, Joe Kappas, brains behind car. Inside the magazine was a 4-page story about Joe. The title was Joe Kappas, Sinner or Genius. The article pointed out that the car campaign had hurt sales of domestic cars, that Joe had used a trick to turn an unpopular imported car into the second largest selling import in the nation in 1975, and that he had done this in 1 year. Now, what was the title of the article in Moment? The title of the article was Joe Kappas, Sinner or Genius. The article concluded, the campaign created by Joe Kappas certainly points out the power of advertising. However, it raises serious questions about the rights of companies to use Joe Kappas' type of advertising. There was no truth in Kappas' campaign, only tricks. Yes, Joe Kappas could claim, "We'll see the car that is number one in the nation." He can point out that his statement is true. In fact, the name of the car is number one in the nation. But clearly, the car has that name so that Joe Kappas and the manufacturers of car products can lie. Listen to question number 2. What did the article point out? The article pointed out that the car campaign had hurt the sales of domestic cars and that Joe had used a trick to boost the sales of the car. Now, what did the article point out about Joe's claim? We sell the car that is number one in the nation. So, what the article pointed out about Joe's claim is that Joe used the name number one in the nation to lie about car. Let's continue reading. As a matter of record, the model that is named number one in the nation was not number one. It was the fourth best-selling imported model and the seventh best-selling model of all cars sold in the country. The 3 top-selling 1975 models were manufactured here. The Joe Kappas campaign points out that truth in advertising involves more than words, it involves intent. Joe Kappas' intent was clearly fraud. Now, where were the top-selling models really manufactured? The top-selling models were really manufactured in this country. Now let's go ahead and continue reading. Joe read the article 4 times. It made him feel quite bad. Joe was not a person with dishonest intent. He was a super salesperson, not a fraud. He understood people and what made them tick. He had seen the Iota as a challenge. It was an opportunity for him to take a product that was not doing well and turn it into a success. To Joe, that was a good thing because it didn't involve destroying. It involved building something. At least that's how Joe had felt earlier. Now, however, he had some doubts. Perhaps the Moment article was accurate in suggesting that Joe had used tricks and deceit to sell Iota cars. Although he had succeeded in turning the Iota into a huge success, he had hurt other people along the way. Let's listen to question number 4. Why did Joe feel bad after reading the article? Joe felt bad after reading the article because he was not a person with dishonest intent. Let's continue reading. After reading the Moment article, Joe decided he needed time to think. He didn't accept any phone calls during the next day. In fact, he didn't spend much time at the agency. He spent a lot of time walking around the city. Every time he passed one of the car billboards, he stopped and examined it. They didn't look too clever to him now. "See the biggest selling car at your car dealer," he said to himself. What does that mean? It means see a little Iota at your Iota dealer, but that's not what it says. Let's go ahead and listen to question number 5. How did Joe spend the day after reading the article? After reading the article, Joe spent the day walking around the city and thinking. He listened to people talking to each other about car. "My daughter is an automobile dealer," Joe overheard one woman saying to another, "and you would not believe the trouble that she has had since that ugly car came on the market. She gets phone calls from people wanting to buy cars. She's had to go to countless meetings. Her company is filing a lawsuit against car. It's a mess." Joe overheard a couple of young men discussing car. One of them said, "I think it's great. I think this is just what we need to wake us up. Maybe now we'll get some laws to make advertising honest." The more Joe listened to people talk, the more he became convinced that he had to do something to fix the situation. But what could he do now? Nearly 400 dealers were selling cars. The campaign was legal, even if it was based on falsehood. There was no way Joe could turn back the clock back 1 year and change the events that had taken place. So what could he do? Let's go ahead and listen to question number 6. So what convinced Joe that he needed to fix the situation? What convinced Joe to fix the situation is the things that he heard from people saying about the car campaign and the problems that it had caused. Joe now had a new challenge, and he loved challenges. Although he didn't know what his strategy would be, he knew that he would do something to correct the situation. However, he didn't want to hurt the people at the advertising agency or the dealers who were selling cars. That was going to be hard to do. Joe had been walking, listening to people, and thinking for nearly a week when an idea hit him. He was walking through the park, past a small pond that was dotted with ducks, when suddenly he stopped, snapped his fingers, and said, "I think I've got a plan that will work." When we're done, make sure we complete lesson 111. Have a great day, boys and girls.